Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Yep, we are in the right place. Mapping Hour. This is hour number 3. Thanks for coming back and joining us. And remember, you can reach us at mappinghour@esri.com if you need to. Just a quick review about last time. We got to jump in and spend a bunch of time with GeoInquiries. Great instructional content using GIS as the context for looking at the classroom content. We got to see a bunch of map viewer tools being engaged again, and we really got to focus on features and attributes and tables. That was last time. Reminder, as we're moving in towards the future here now, next time, session number 4, from then on, you're going to need to make sure that you have a login. So if you don't yet have your own login, request a temporary login. Go to esriurl.com/mappinghour, put in your survey. Yes, I need one of those, and we'll get it to you. What are we doing today? What are we doing this hour? More GeoInquiries. So we got more content, and the context around it is going to include some of these tools and techniques for working with this great content. We've got some worksheets, some screenshots, and some other hacks that you're going to be hearing about. Essentially, strategies for teaching with these great tools. And we're going to be spending a little extra time looking at classification and symbolization. How do cartographers work? Without further ado, let's turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Charlie. So today we're going to begin by looking at the math collection from GeoInquiries. And hopefully at this point, my linear rate of change activity is showing on screen. The math collection includes 15 level 1 activities. Those don't require login or sign in or anything else. And recall that GeoInquiries are generally 15-minute activities with a pre-built map. So the map can be loaded up on students or learners' iPads, devices, or even phones as they go through this content exploration. Helping me with this will be Joseph in just a few moments. This activity is particularly interesting, I think, for a lot of educators because it really does address social studies, math, and science. Again, this is inside the math collection, but what we're fundamentally looking at is growth models, and we're looking at linear models of growth, and that touches on a lot of different content areas for a lot of different instructors. You'll notice that our math standards are listed here. We're using Common Core, and of course our learning outcomes are identified. We go down to our map link, our map URL that students or educators can use to access the interactive map. Joseph will help us out with that in just a moment. And as we scroll down through our 5-stage activity, really what we're going to focus on is identifying where the population in Michigan is now. Follow that by identifying where the population was at a time in the past in terms of numbers. And this is all based on census data, folks. And then by the time we get to explain, we're going to start trying to calculate the rate of change from point A in time to point B in time. And as some of you may recall from your high school algebra classes, we're going to use a pretty simple linear equation, mx, y equals mx plus b, to calculate that change. So there's a little bit of math involved here, but not a lot, and it's pretty clearly defined here as you go through the scripted set of activities. Lastly, or nearly last, as we enter into the elaborate section, we really want to look at whether or not individual counties inside of Michigan are increasing or decreasing growth. And finally, what we want to look at is how that growth, that linear growth in Kent County compares to linear growth in other counties in Michigan. So a lot of really cool and powerful stuff to think about and work with in the map today, while still maintaining something that's quite approachable for everybody. So our 2 technical tool tips for this activity includes viewing a table, which we've looked at back in episode 2, and then identifying map features, which we've done several times now. So at this point, I think we'll ask Joseph to step in with his view of the map and take it away.
Many thanks. How are you folks doing? Okay, let's go ahead and touch on what Tom was mentioning earlier, and that is we're going to use the linear rate of change geoinquiry to explore and investigate and build some GIS skills along the way. We're really excited by this and hope you are too. I'm just going to dive into this particular geoinquiry. Every single one of these has a URL in it. And so all you have to do is click on that URL that's usually in some sort of big bold stripe, and you will get the map inside ArcGIS Online, our web-based geographic information system. Now, the map opens with one layer visible. It is a Choropleth map. Some of you might have heard that term. Some of you may use that term. Choro meaning area. Pleth meaning like plethora, a multitude. So area, multitude. Some people might know it as an area value map. But the idea is that areas are colored or shaded in proportion to a variable that is a summary of some sort of quantity in that area. In this case, as you can see on the left side, we've got the legend there, the 2010 population. Now, just as a small note, this isn't all of Michigan, right? So remember those bookmarks? We've got one that says Michigan. Hey, we don't want to forget about those Upper Peninsula people. So that is part of the investigation. That is part of the Michigan County set. We're going to zoom in, though, on this part of the state, and let's take a look at how many counties we actually have. So if we go into content, we can look at the number of counties. This will be important later on when we talk about growth models and comparisons. We have 83 features. In this case, a feature is a polygon. It's a county. And the nice thing about Michigan is that many of these counties, like Iowa and many other mid part of the country states, they're a nice, neat size. They're sort of a rectangle in many cases. So that being said, just one note here. Do you have to use Michigan? Well, in this case, it's the one that's tied to the geoinquiry. But later on in the mapping hour, we're going to talk about how do you get data. And so, yes, you can do this by country. You can do this by state. You can do this by zip code. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here are part of that, what I indicated in a couple of sessions ago, part of what I consider to be the 12 key skills in GIS. And was Tom was indicating, classification and symbology are two of the really core part of the set of 12-ish tools. So once you really get comfortable with this classification and symbology, seriously, folks, you can do anything in a GIS. So coming back to our theme of population change, remember how I was saying in a couple of episodes ago that, you know, if you made a change, it's, let's say your students are all of a sudden, where am I? I'm in the middle of Lake Michigan. You can always go back to the original extent by just refreshing. This is just in a web browser tab, so I can get back to my original map here. Okay, so now I've got the 2010 population. And as you know, we are all into change over space and time. And the idea here is that we've got a default classification that the creator of this map set up, and it's a nice, neat breaking set of values. Notice we've got the darkest color here, 1 million to 1.8 million. The next classification, the next category is 500,000 to 1 million. So notice that they're nice, neat breaking points, but they're not the same amount, right? That top category is 850,000. The next one is 500,000. The next one is 250,000. So they're not the same. That's going to be important as we work through this. So it touches on a bigger issue that you as a map user and a map creator, and everybody is a map creator now that we have these web-based tools, you have a lot of power at your fingertips. So maps are powerful sources of information. They always have been. They always will be. Use them with care. And so that being said, how do we change that? If we, okay, I see that, okay, there's got to be a couple of counties here that are in this highest. So remember this pop-up that we talked about earlier? I can click on a couple of these that look like they're in the top category. I don't know exactly which one is the top unless I actually look at the pop-up, which is pulling information from the table. The table, remember, is the I part of GIS, the map is the G part of GIS, and the thing that links the two is the S part of GIS. So I can see right away here, Oakland County had, let's scroll down a little bit, 1.2 million people in the last decennial census from 2010, and we'll soon, of course, have the 2020 numbers at our fingertips within this set of data as well. So, okay, 1.8 for Wayne County and 1.2 for Oakland County. Okay, well, we can get a little bit more details than that. First of all, though, let's go ahead and change the symbology and also change the classification. This is part of the lesson, but we're going to dig into it a little bit deeper here. And so, first of all, let's take a look at the table of data behind the 2010 numbers. You can enlarge this table if you want to. So, for example, if we scroll over here to the 2010 population, notice, just like in Excel, we've got a couple of choices there if we click on the field name. One of which is sort descending. If I sort descending, and this is a good concept to get across to students, right? What is ascending versus descending? Descending, right? The biggest of something, the most of something is going to be at the top. So in this case, it's 1.8 million. If we click inside that table on that row, we can use these three little lines in here and we can say, oh, center on selection. So now we've got that county in the middle of our screen, and I've enlarged the table so much that you don't see much map there. But there's the county that has the 1.8 million, and we verified that a moment ago with the pop-up. Another thing before we leave the table is that we have, as you probably noticed here, statistics. Ooh, this is some nice math integration here. So we've got, okay, 83 counties in our case. The sum, what is that? Get the students to think about, okay, if all the counties are summed, that's going to be, in this case, the sum total of the population in the great state of Michigan, the Great Lakes state, in 2010, according to the census. You want to touch a little bit on according to the data that is presented here. The minimum, there's a county somewhere with 2,156 people. There's another county with 1.8 million people, which is the county we're looking at right now, Wayne County. And then you've got a nice way of introducing the whole idea of an average. What's the average county population? In 2010, it was 119,000-ish. And a standard deviation. So you can, okay, introduce standard deviation here depending on the grade level of your students, of course. Okay, more about that in a moment. So these statistics, I think, are really powerful. They're easy to branch off of and go into some deeper concepts in math or other subjects. So let's get rid of this table at the moment, and let's go ahead and change the symbology just a little bit more. Now, we've got a bookmark here, so we can always go back to Michigan if we want to, and there we go. Let's just scoot that over here. Okay, wonderful. How about this, folks? Let's go ahead and change the style. Now, when you get the change the style dialogue there, it may seem a bit daunting at first. What I like to think about when I go to change style, and by the way, for those of you that have used other forms of Esri GIS like ArcGIS Pro or ArcMap, it's directly analogous to change symbology. We're changing the symbology, you're changing the style, how the map looks. The way I think about this is that, number one, what do you want to show? Okay, right now I'm going to show population in 2010, but I'm going to style it or symbolize it differently than the default that I saw a moment ago. The options is it's saying, Joseph, you've got counts and amounts, color. Your Choropleth map is counts and amounts, color. If you want to change it, here are the options to change it. In other words, the ones that say select, meaning it means go to a different kind of style. You see what I mean? So I always think, okay, whatever the one that says options, that's the one I'm on right now, and then I can adjust what I'm mapping. So let's start really simply and go to options right there. Counts and amounts, color, options. This is where the person that set up this map set up the breaks that we saw, the very clean numbers. It was manual breaks according to what that person wanted that maps to look at. So manual breaks. If we go to manual breaks here and adjust the classification, let's say we go up to 8 again. Notice the manual breaks, and I'm going to go with 8 categories. The range, and this is another mathematics concept, the range is from basically 2,000, so almost zero, up to 1.8 million, right? And so if we divided that whole range into 8 classes or 8 categories, if you want to think about another term, if you look at the numbers over here on the left side, you've got roughly 225,000. That makes sense. So we could leave it at that. But let's go a little bit deeper now. Let's say I want a really simple map and I only want 2 classes, and maybe I want everything. Oh, I can't quite go to 1 million. Oh, what do I do? Oh, look, I can type in 1 million right there, and now I've got a 2-category map. We'll discuss the merits of whether this is useful or not in a moment, but look, I've got a simple map with 2 categories or classes, right? The counties that have over 1 million in 2010 and the counties that had less than 1 million in 2010. Let's dig a little deeper now. Let's say I want to change the style one more time, and remember, options means change what you have now. So let's go into options and let's go into quantile. Now, we have documentation that provides, I think, a really nice teaching resource, a very graphics-laden 2-page document, for example, that says what's quantile versus standard deviation versus natural breaks, etc., with examples of if you change it to this, it's going to look like this. Again, touching on how you classify and how you symbolize means a lot. It influences how your end user is going to understand the phenomenon that you're using. So in this case, if we change it to quantile with a, let's say, a 5-category map or 5 classes, what that does is that, let's say, okay, done. Let's pull up a legend here. It divides, in my case, 82 counties into 5 categories or classes. So 82 divided by 5. We need some math people out there. 14-ish, 13-ish in some small percentage. So roughly 13 counties are going to be classified with the lowest category. And then the next 13, and then the next 13, and then the next. Does that make sense? So we've got quantile, meaning the same number of observations in every single one of the categories. Let's go to one more thing, and then we'll go to another topic. But just to show you that, okay, let's say I want to introduce and reinforce the concept of a standard deviation. So notice here, we've got a standard deviation in here. So, okay, because this set of data, I want to show this graphic right here. This is a very crude diagram, I realize, but you've got most counties, right? Remember, the mean is 119,000. That was the mean county population in 2010. But you've got this long tail with a couple of counties way out there at 1 million, Detroit City and surrounding counties. So this is your distribution of the data. So that said, if you go back to the map, you're going to have just a few counties way out. Notice, let's take a look at the legend here. A couple of counties are 5, 6 standard deviations above the mean because they're way out there in that right-hand tail. And a lot of counties are really pretty close to the mean, or actually, 0.5 to 1.5 standard deviations within the mean. So you've got a lot of counties in that sort of second category, and then, of course, a couple that are very low population. So that's a little bit about symbology. Again, you can use that on any data, and I just wanted to reinforce the whole notion. I'm going to refresh the page to get back to the beginning, because something that Tom touched on, I think, is a really powerful part of this lesson, and I don't want to give it too short of a shrift, but one of them is Kent County. So if we look at Kent County, this is where Tom was indicating what you're going to do in this part of the lesson is you're going to calculate the growth rate, which is roughly about 4,000 people per year, and then understand whether Kent County, for example, met that projected linear growth rate, okay? And then by extension, you can use that for other counties in Michigan or beyond. So let's go back. One more thing that I wanted to touch on here with you all is the whys of where. As Tom mentioned, you can use this in a lot of different ways. Sure, the math, the numbers that we were looking at, the growth rates, etc., looking at change over time. But there's also this whys of where. If we look at the population in 1900, for example, right, and touching on, okay, you've got the rise of mining in the Upper Peninsula. And so you had a lot of counties that increased in population, and then they decreased in population. And I think that's an important concept to get across to students, because a lot of students think, hey, every place around the world is growing. We've got 7.5 billion people. Every place is growing. Well, no, they're growing at different rates, and indeed some places have decreased. So if you want to touch a little bit on sociology and human geography, what happens, what are the challenges when a county or an area is actually decreasing population, right? When the last high school closes, when the last hospital closes in your county, there's some challenges there, as well as counties that have increased vastly in population, like these suburban Detroit counties. And then you can also get into a little bit of urban studies where you talk about the rise of industrial cities in mid part of the 20th century, and then what happened, why did they actually start declining, and what can we do about it? How can we make those cities more viable? Okay, so those are just a few things that we wanted to touch on, and it all in conjunction with this linear rate of change. We touched on a couple of the extra tools that Tom promised that we would. We talked about viewing the table, summarizing, calculating the statistics, and also identifying the map features. So I hope that was valuable. Thanks. Oh, let me just, can I just touch on a couple last things? And that is, maps are powerful means of communication, which is one of the main points. There's all kinds of bad maps out there, and I've got a whole presentation on good maps, bad maps, but a couple of resources to share. This map, for example, I have no idea what that legend means. I really don't. It doesn't make any sense to me. So again, use care. Okay, so those are a couple things I wanted to leave you with.
Thanks, Joseph. Very good. And a lot of important ideas there that will help with some of the other content that we're going to share. So we're going to take a look at our second geo-inquiry for the hour. This one's called Investigating Biodiversity. It's actually a part of the environmental science collection. This particular activity is actually based on environmental science, but can also be used readily in a typical 10th grade biology classroom, particularly in the environmental science or the ecology chapters. So the interesting thing about this activity, of course, is that it is actually linking biodiversity and species richness to environmental and biological factors. So we're tying it, in this case, actually to the AP Environmental Science standards. So we have our standards tie, and then, of course, we discuss our outcomes, our learning outcomes. This time, Kylie is going to help us out in a few moments as we explore the map. The map pop-out URL is available for clicking or copying, pasting. So really, in this activity, we're going to focus on identifying the biodiversity hotspots and cold spots around the globe. And then as we move into the Explore section, we're going to begin investigating predation and how animals can affect speciation. Really, as we get further into the activity, we'll take a look specifically at larger animals, or larger mammals rather, and how they affect speciation. Here in the Explain section, we're going to take a serious look at mammal biodiversity so that we can again link it with predation and ultimately speciation. And then as we start to enter into the Elaborate section, we need to understand the biodiversity hotspots for mammals. And then finally, we're going to make a linkage between the density and diversity of species around the globe. So as you can imagine, we're going to, in this map, be looking at several different range maps and species richness maps and do some compare and contrast. So in terms of the technical tooltips for this activity, we're going to identify a map feature. That's pretty straightforward. And then we're going to turn layers on and off, also fairly straightforward. And as with all geo-inquiries, just a reminder, there are next steps or extensions, particularly for classroom teachers, as well as ties to textbooks, commonly used textbooks in the AP Environmental Science class. So we have another thematic map here, largely thematic map anyway. And Kylie, you want to show us a couple interesting things on that map?
All right, what you're seeing now is that same geo-inquiry that Tom was just showing. And again, we have our map URL front and center. I've already opened that map, so I'm going to jump on over here. Now, actually, I'm not sure if I was messing with this map right before we started, so I'm going to go ahead and start with refreshing. Again, we're going to refresh and make sure we're seeing exactly what the exercise planned for us to see, and it's a great way to just get started with the map. Before we jump in here, one thing I want to remind you of is the legend. And the reason I want to remind you of is one of the things Joseph was talking about was all the different symbology, and you can change that, right? So when I open this map, I'm seeing yellows and oranges and browns, but someone else could take the same data and perhaps they're showing it in green, showing it in blues. I don't need to learn orange means low and yellow means high. I need to learn where to look to find out what this data is communicating with its colors. And that's going to be in the legend. So you can see right down here, we have an abundance of original species. That's what those colors are showing. So in this map, as Tom was mentioning, we want to link our density and diversity. And so we can see there's a number of layers included. Now, I'm going to start right here. I want to look at the biomes. So I'm curious about the relationship between the biomes and the original species. Now you can see both of those layers are on, and you could see a hint of them on top of each other. Like you can see kind of some green right in here, and that's coming from this biomes layer. And you can also see the darker oranges and yellows we talked about, which is the abundance. Now for me, it's a little bit hard to see where they're overlapping, and so there's a couple tools I can use to help myself explore these things. The first of those, of course, would be to turn the layer off or on. Well, in this case, since I'm trying to compare, if it's off, that makes it a little bit hard to do. But one thing I could do is decrease the transparency a bit to make it show through a bit more. Now, I still find it, for my eyes, a little bit hard to read. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave it about where it was, and I'm going to try another different tool. Instead, what I'm going to do is start interacting with the map by clicking on it. And we saw that earlier, and those pop-ups that you see. So you can see here, I'm seeing some species abundance low. Well, that was the feature, or the characteristic on the map that I could see with my eyes. I could see where that dark brownish orangey kind of color was, but what I couldn't see was which biome it's related to. Now we saw this earlier, but there's multiple things here. You can see it's one of three. So let's go ahead and find the information that I'm actually curious about at that location. What is the biome that's underlying this brown area? Here we go. All right, so now I can see it's temperate grasslands. And what's really interesting is this cyan outline color is showing that that's the item selected. So that's a GIS concept you'll hear us talking about, selecting a feature. And what does that mean? Well, sometimes it means showing its information like we're doing here. Sometimes it means just the outline. Sometimes it means both. You can also see it in the table when you were working with those with Joseph. So if we were to come in here and we click on the same area, you can see selected 1. So that's just another way to see this information. Now, I don't need the table today. So I'm going to go back to that pop-up we were looking at to get back my highlight. Now, the first thing I bet Charlie's thinking right now is, oh, cool, look, over on the right, there's more areas, right? Like when Joseph talked about selection and he was talking about like the points on the map and selecting things, and he mentioned in the other earlier hour that we did that there could be lines, there could be polygons or areas as they're kind of commonly called. All of those things can be selected. And what they'll look like selected is going to be a bit different. Obviously, if I have a point, it's pretty easy to put a cyan color around it. A line, a polygon, or area, those get a little trickier, but it can often use an outline to do it, like you're seeing here. Now, this polygon in particular or area has something kind of interesting about it, which is it's not just one polygon or area, right? You can see some of it over here. And then the part that got Charlie interested was over here. We're seeing some highlight, but I didn't click over here. Well, that's true. In this data set, and Joseph has emphasized a number of times, right? We need to look at the particular data set we're using. We need to understand our data. That's really key to understanding the maps. And in this data set, each of these biomes is done as a single feature or item on the map. That doesn't mean a single polygon, as you can see here. So all the different areas across the globe that have this same biome are one item on the map. So when I select one, I see all of them. Now, in this map in particular, let's check this out. So we have them selected, and our abundance of original species, right where I clicked, is that low color. And look, over here on this side, there's more of that low color in there. So we can start to identify some of the common characteristics where these two things overlap. Now, one way we were doing that was through a little bit of a visual integration before I had done that selection, right? Where I was talking about maybe we can change transparency and see a better hint of it. Another way is through adding this visual clue of that outline to really help us define the areas, but I'm still doing a bit of visual integration here, right? I need to identify with my eyes where the two things are overlapping. All right, so I just want to show one more example of that. If we click up here in Canada, we can look at the biome that it is here. And look, again, we have large areas. And in this case, it's pretty interesting to see that boundary, right? Let's go ahead and we're going to go in our content. And now that I know what biome it is, I'm going to go ahead and hide that. But we lose the selection. So you have to kind of play with how much you want to turn things off, how much you want to use selection, and which parts of it matter to you. Now, we can use another tool that we saw earlier of changing our base map to change the amount of noise. Because let me show you really quickly something. If I turn off this original species layer, I can see these biomes a lot clearer. But if I turn off the biomes, wait, there's still the same kind of colors. Well, that's the base map I'm looking at, this topographic base map. It happens to use a lot of the same colors. So what I may want to do, depending on what I'm investigating, is switch over to, again, one of my personal favorite base maps, the light gray canvas, which lets our data be a little bit louder on the screen. All right, we've played with a number of things through here, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh so that we're getting back to that original view. There is one more thing I want to talk about selection on. So I'm going to go ahead and do a selection again. And again, how I do that is clicking on the map. Right, here's our high area. If we go like this, here's a particular area. Actually, there's a really good example in there, so I'm going to sidetrack myself again here. We're looking at species abundance high. I'm going to go to my content. I'm going to turn off my biomes and really focus on that. Species abundance high. Okay, it's this area here. There's a very clearly defined shape. Whoa, what's over here? I'm going to click on that one. Species abundance high, but it's a different thing selected. And this is just to nail home that point I made about having to know your data. This shows two different things. When I look at the species abundance, there are different features or areas defined on the map for high. That's how this data was set up. And we can see that when we open the table. Because you'll see, well, here we're seeing some no data ones. But if we get down to them, you're seeing a bunch of highs and lows. Whereas when we looked at the biomes table, or when we just turn it on and select it, we're getting one selection for that whole setting. So just another reminder, you have to understand your data. Sometimes that's going to mean looking at the table. Sometimes that's going to mean playing with it. And sometimes it'll just mean either of those. Which one do you enjoy more? Which one makes more sense to you? We all learn a little bit differently. And so some of these tools will take figuring out which one speaks to you. All right, so the last point I did want to make about selection is that there's something kind of interesting that you saw with Joseph earlier in the earthquake map in the last hour, right? I don't know if you remember, but he applied a filter to look at just some of the bigger earthquakes. And what that did is it took some of the data and it just pulled it off the map. It was gone. We were no longer seeing those lower magnitude earthquakes, so we could really focus on those higher magnitude earthquakes. Now, I want to just talk a little bit about filter and selection because both of them are focusing our attention. And Charlie has a great way he explains this, so I'm going to steal his way. And that is, he talks about selection would be like if I asked all of you who are left-handed to raise your hand. So I'm a lefty, my hand's up. You can still see that Charlie, Tom, Joseph, they're still in the room, but my hand's up. All right, if I was going to say, everyone who's not left-handed, leave the room, they would all have to duck out of sight, and there they go. All right, let's hope they come back, because I don't want to have to finish this whole hour on my own. Great, good to see them returning. So selection is that idea of raising your hand. You can still see all the data and all the choices, but you know which ones you're focused on. And filtering almost takes that a step farther. It excludes the other things from your view. All right, one other thing we're going to look at really quickly, and this will be our last thing, just to get to some of the other layers, because there's some great diversity layers in here. Now, in the exercise, you heard a ton about like the mammal diversity, right? Like it was talking about predation and all those things. So I'm not going to pick that layer. And the reason I'm not going to do that is these geoinquiries are kind of fun, right? You have some written steps and things to try. I want to leave that for you to do on your own. Play with it, right? That's one of my favorite things with maps. Just play with them. So instead, I'll pick the diversity of the flowering plants. I'm going to go ahead and turn off our species because it doesn't matter. And wow, it's kind of a cool map, right? What do you think these colors mean? Well, yeah, it's green, it's plants. So does that mean that the green means there are greener plants there? Right. Let's use the legend. So again, we can come in here and understand this map is actually showing flowering plant families in that region. And like before, we can click on them and you'll see some highlights and selections appear. Now you may notice that this is still biomes. If we go and click in the area we were clicking before, if I can get onto a different one, there we go. So you're seeing from our content those biomes. You're not seeing anything about the plants in here. And that's because whoever wrote this map chose not to make that something that has additional information that shows up. That's a choice the map author can make. In this case, there's no real information that they need you to read more about. Sure, they could tell you, oh, that one's in the 182 family higher range. You can get that from the legend. So they didn't feel important to include that as an interactive piece of information on the map. All right, so just to remind, we talked a little bit about selection. We've talked about how that differs from filtering, so maybe you need to use the different tools, and a lot about actually selection and the different shapes and how you need to understand your data, and how the map author is going to make some choices for you. So what you need to do is be empowered by knowing where the legend is, where the content is, how to turn things on and off, and how to check what these things mean so that you're able to read these maps. All right, I know I didn't stick too much right into that lesson, but it's written out for you. So after this, go ahead and play with it. See what you can learn throughout the steps that it has for you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Kylie. That was a great conversation. What we'd like to do is take a look at one aspect of geoinquiries before we jump into the final geoinquiry. And that is something that we built out called student worksheets for educators that want to be able to use geoinquiries in a worksheet-driven approach. From our geoinquiry story map that I'm scrolling through now, you will find a link to our worksheets in number 5 of the Getting Started section. Now, these worksheets are in a Google Doc format, and we're going to pretend like I just clicked the link, and it's going to take us over to Google Drive where these worksheets are stored by collection. So the biodiversity activity that Kylie just did has a worksheet in here. It's in the environmental science block. And the activity that Joseph had done previously with linear rates is in the math collection. And the activity that Charlie is going to work with us next on is in the human geography collection. In a few minutes, Charlie, in fact, is going to show us how we can work with an individual worksheet that could be downloaded from this place to help make your geoinquiry more interesting and more accessible to students, whether they're sitting across the table from you or maybe sitting halfway across the state. So with that in mind, we'll turn to our last geoinquiry of the day. This geoinquiry comes from the Human Geography Collection, or the AP Human Geography Collection of Geoinquiries, and the activity is called USA Demographics. As you might guess, it uses USA census data to investigate population density over time. We use in this activity the AP benchmarks for AP Human Geography to document what we're doing, and then of course we roll into learner outcomes. And like every other geoinquiry, we provide an interactive map URL. Charlie's going to work with that in just a minute. In this activity, effectively, what we are going to do is map population density across the US. We're going to examine income across the US. And then we are going to examine age. And finally, as we get near the end of this, we're going to examine age-related patterns and how they vary with respect to the scale of the map. It really opens up an interesting conversation, much as Joseph touched on earlier and Kylie, about understanding what the map is telling you or what the data are telling you. Our final 2 tech tips for this activity will be bookmarks, which we've done a little bit with in the past, and transparency, which we've also done a little bit of work with in the past. So with that, USA Demographics, we'll go ahead and throw it over to Charlie.
Thank you, Tom. Here we go. All right, I've got the USA Demographics, and I've already clicked on the link to get the access to the map. This is the way it opens up. And I've already gone in and looked at the folder inside the Google Drive for the human geography zone. And I see, yep, this is item number 4. This is the USA demographics. Now, how do I access it? Well, I can click on it, and here I've got it. But I'm not signed in, so what I'm going to do is to see if I can go ahead and download it. File, download as a Microsoft Word document. Go ahead and put it on my desktop. There we go, on the desktop. I've got it. Let me just, it's a Word document, so let me just open it up. There we go. I've got my Word document, and I can begin working within it. And it's got the instructions that you see in the step-by-step process, so that if I'm a teacher and I want to have somebody go through this, I can take just the elements that I want from the main section of the GeoInquiries and put them in here and put in spaces in here, make sure that there is a space for the students to write their name up here at the top and write something in down there. What I really like about this is that this is something that the teachers can modify to their heart's content. You can add in additional kinds of questions in any of these sections, or delete any of the sections that you want. This is yours to control and to operate as an instructor. And you can go through and just focus on the elements that you like. Now, this is a great activity because it gets to focus on demographics, population density. Well, it's not just density. If I click on here and I get Los Angeles County, I can see that there's a color attached here, but I don't have anything really to click on. If I go over and take a look in the contents, okay, I see that there are some other layers. And, well, let's see, Joseph was talking about you could maybe come in and change the scheme for these. So it's just, wait a second, I don't have those same kinds of elements. This is a map where the layers are set up in a particular fashion that you can't modify them. You can use them as they are, you can turn them on, turn them off, you can play with the transparency, but you can't change the way they're symbolized. It's a very cool data layer so that I can come in to explore Chicago and see what the community is like. And it's got scale sensitive data attached to it. And you can see that it's giving me the same kind of legend, population per square mile. Even as I zoom in and out, I still get those same color schemes. It's a very powerful layer to explore. And so are all these other ones. Household income, median age, median age, median. Half of them are above, half of them are below. Median right in the center, half above, half below. And so I can come in and do all kinds of exploration between age, income, population density, and explore those things. And then I can come in and say, all right, wait a second. Median age, Utah and Florida tracts. Wait a minute. How do I get to see the Utah and the Florida tracts all together here? Utah and Florida. the scale dependence, I can't see them both at the same time because they're in different places. They're really focused to display at a close-in picture. I can compare the Utah and the Florida zones, and I can go over and visit Florida and back and visit Utah. So these bookmarks are really handy. You don't have to see everything just right at the same time. But so we've been working with how do you teach with these things? And one of the ways was to accept the instructions as they're written. And where did my document go? Here we are. To give somebody a set of activities to go through. Or you could also think about this as a starting point. Now, remember when in the first episode, Kylie had me modify the map in order to add some tools to it. I would like to enhance this for my students. I want them to be able to consider one other layer: population density, household income, median age. Those tell me some things. I want to discover sort of what might be some impacts with education or some relationships with education. I know there's a layer of education data. I want to add it into this. I want to give my students the instruction to go ahead and add that. So let's keep track of this. I want to, step one, modify the map. Now, by having modified the map, I can add some additional data. Step two, add data. Step three, search for layers. Now I need to know what I'm going to be searching for because there are lots of layers available. What I want to search for first is not inside my organization. It's inside ArcGIS Online, where there's a lot of data there. So I'm going to go search for Education 2017. Now I know, because I've been playing with this, that this is a layer that has some really interesting data. I can go ahead and add that layer to the map. And then I'm done adding it to the map. Now, interestingly, this has state and county and census tract data as well. So as I explore, wait, I'm seeing different color map or different color dots. Let me turn off the median. I'm seeing different colored dots and different sizes, and some of them are brighter or more intense, and some of them are less intense. I better go look and see what these things mean working with the legend. Wow. I'm going to use Kylie's trick and get the lightest color base map so that I can see in a uniform environment. These things are really different here. So the color is giving me one characteristic. The color gives me one characteristic. The size gives me a second characteristic. And the intensity of the color gives me a third characteristic. So I can add in a layer that I want my students to use. This is a layer that is a nationwide layer of data looking at what is the predominant education level of those 25 and up in 2017. How far did people get in their education scheme? So if I click on this, because I've learned to click on things, I can recognize, and I've learned to hover over things, that there are data in these pop-ups, and I can understand that, wow, this one has a high number of people that are in this particular zone, in this county, and the most common level of education is identified by the color. That's there, that's the most common level. And the strength by which it is higher than the others is shown by the intensity of that color. So I can learn some really interesting things with a single symbol. What we want you to recognize is people who are constructing these maps, constructing these symbols, classifying data in a particular fashion, they have something that they're trying to do with the map. They want to give you the opportunity to do something. You need to try to explore the layers and figure out what it is that people are working with. So I've walked through, there are about a handful of items that I might have. I might get my document out, add in a couple of steps for people to do, and then say at the final part, capture a screenshot that shows me that you've done that. And so here, I'm going to show the legend in conjunction with the other elements, and I'm on a Macintosh. You can do this on a Mac, you can do it on a Windows machine, you can do it on a Chromebook, you can do it on an iPad. You can do a capture screen. I'm going to grab that screen, and it's now, there's my screen. I'm just going to say I'm done with that. It's sitting on my desktop. There's my screenshot, and I'm going to grab it and drag it and put it on my document. So you can have the students say, I want to walk through a series of steps and document this. And do the students need to be signed in? I'm not even signed in here. So anybody can do this. Anybody can teach with this. You can create these lessons. You can modify the lessons. You can, all without being signed in, have the students put something together and modify it, add their information into it. These geo-inquiries are really powerful for teaching and adding great content. Tom, I think I'm done. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Well
Anything
done.
that you want to add into that?
I think you all did an excellent job today. That was great.
All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull up my review. So we're almost at the end of this hour. Remember, you're going to need a login for all the rest of the mapping hour sessions. So make sure you have that ready for the next time. What did we cover today? Geo-inquiries, great starting content to work with. Great sets of activities just working as they are, or work with the worksheets, get people to do some screenshots, add in some things like going out and grabbing other data as well. And there's even more that you can do with these things once you get accustomed to working with them. And that whole process of styling, classifying and symbolizing, that's a piece that takes time to get comfortable with. And there's a document that I'll be pointing you to at the end, just a second here. The concept, labels. You saw those labels in Joseph's section there, where they just brought up a label sitting on the top of the county. It's just the county name. There are all kinds of things that you can do with these tools. Classifying and thinking about the classification methods. Symbolizing, working with a color ramp and these graduated colors. How many colors? Which color? reds to yellows, yellow to white, yellow to blue. Everybody who is working in the map making business, they're trying to make this map for people to use. What's the purpose of the map? What's the purpose of the map maker? Those are questions that you, when you're making maps, need to answer. And you, when you're looking at maps, need to be comfortable saying, I wonder, I'm starting to get skilled on making these maps. I wonder what the person who had this in mind, who was making this, had in mind. What did they want to do? What did they want to show? Sometimes people may have an idea. I just want to put a bright screaming fire engine red on here. And sometimes that makes people feel alerted. And softer colors may be less alerted, even if it's the same content. So think about those elements. We'll come back to them again. Now, some resources if you want to practice this. Again, you can come to the GeoInquiry Story Map. That's where you can find that link to go directly to the Google Docs. You can come in and go to esri.com/geoinquiries to get all the geoinquiries that you want. And from the esriurl.com/mapping-hour link, that's where you can link to those other videos. Make sure that you got a login for next time. That's your last warning. Now, in terms of resources about map design, there's a document that one of our colleagues put together some years back when things were, we had fewer choices to work with. Now the choices are very elaborate, and it's a good document. It's a tried and true, time tested, because it's working on these universal skills of map design. And it's a very good, very short document that you can download and take a look at, keep, and refer to on an ongoing basis. Now, if you really like this and you want to see somebody pay some, good attention to how they're working with it in color and size, there's a story map. We've been working with a couple of story maps. We've slipped them in every now and then. There are a couple of wonderful story maps by somebody in the team that is the cartography story maps team, where they're working with smart mapping using color or using color and size. Go take a look at those. The short URLs are right here. We've reached the end. A great session. Great job, everybody. Thanks. We'll see you next time with your login.